Russian President Vladimir Putin says he is still waiting for Turkey's apology regarding the downing of the Russian Sukhoi Su-24 over Syria.
Until now, we have heard neither clear apologies from the highest political level of Turkey, nor suggestions on the compensation of damages, nor promises to punish the guilty for the crime they committed. It seems that the Turkish leadership is deliberately driving relations between Russia and Turkey into a dead end. We are sorry about it.
We consider the treacherous backstabbing from those we believed to be our partners and allies in the fight against terror totally inexplicable. I mean, the accident of downing the Russian jet by Turkish air forces. What happened 2 days ago in Syrian airspace is against common sense and international law. The plane was shot down on a Syrian territory.
We believe that the Turkish leadership has crossed a line of permissibility, and it is at risk of leading Turkey into the most severe situation from the point of view of long-term national interest and from a point of view of its position in the region.
We don't need to apologize for a situation about which we are right, but we conveyed to them yesterday over the phone that we were saddened by this incident. Today a couple of times we said it was an event which saddened all of us. We conveyed our sadness.
Of course, we are saddened by what happened. We are disturbed by what happened because we have a strategic partnership with the Russian Federation, a partnership of great importance. Despite our different approaches to the Syrian issue, we wouldn't have wanted this incident to take place.
Was it a mistake? And will you apologize?
Well, I think if there's a party that needs to apologize, it's not us. Those who violated our airspace are the ones who need to apologize. Our pilots in our armed forces, they simply fulfilled their duties, which consisted of responding to a violation of the rules of engagement. I think this is the essence.
The Russian president says Moscow had given to the US the flight plan of its bomber downed by Turkey over Syria this week.
We had informed our American colleagues in advance about where, when and on which echelons our pilots will work. The American side, which heads the coalition in which Turkey takes part, knew about the time and the place where our planes were. And it was there, and then that we got hit. Why did they pass this information to the Americans? Either they were not controlling what their allies were doing, or they are leaking this information all over the place.
Get the thoughts of former MI5 agent Annie Mashon joining us on the line there from Brussels. Hi, Annie. You've been watching this, I know, most carefully. Turkey says, doesn't it, that it's speaking about a violation of its airspace, and it's something that Russia denies. And it said this violation took place for a full 17 seconds. And when you look at the map, if you believe Turkey, it was some pinnacle of land. Now, there was no way that this jet was actually flying in towards Turkey. It would have been flying across it anyway. I mean, Russia says that didn't happen anyway. Was any of it an excuse to carry out what happened?
Absolutely not. And in fact, former head of the RAF in the UK, Sir Michael Graydon, went on the record yesterday saying that this was a complete violation of all known sort of protocols for these sort of things. In fact, only in 2012, the Turkish General Command said that, of course, sometimes these very short violations can happen because the jets move so fast and the borders can be all over the place. So, of course, this can happen. This is not an excuse to shoot down an ally's jet. And in fact, Turkey as well has a record, I think, over the last few years of 114 incursions into Greek airspace. Yet they never get shot down. So it's just a fact of life. You know, you've got fast jets. They're going to move around very quickly, and to take an order to shoot down a jet like that very quickly as well would be highly suspect.
Obviously, President Putin took a very strong line on this, and he warned Turkey that something like this can't happen again. Nonetheless, the Turkish president said that they would act in exactly the same way if the same thing, story according to them, happened again. What does that say about the current state of Turkish and Russian relations? Where's it going to go if he's saying that?
Indeed, it can only get worse, I think. Now, one has to wonder why Turkey took this action, and there has been speculation that the decision to have a shoot-down policy was taken a few days ago by the Turkish Prime Minister. Now, they wouldn't take this risk of destabilising a highly inflammatory situation politically anyway, unless they had the backing of their NATO allies. So one has to wonder what sort of incentives, perhaps, Washington might have offered to Turkey to allow them to go ahead with this. Now, one possible theory would be that this would bring, if Turkey does this to a Russian plane, then it might be tempting Russia to retaliate in some way. Once that happens, then NATO, including the Americans, the UK and most of Europe, would then have the pretext to take heavier action against Russia. So it's almost like a sort of proxy action between NATO and Russia.
Yesterday there was a declaration which was very unacceptable. Some people claimed that we were buying oil from Daesh. And the fact that people in positions of authority in Russia said this was actually very, very unacceptable. And I'm going... Yes, and it's a horrific lack of respect vis-à-vis Turkey, because those people who made this claim should prove it.
Well, the Syrian army says neighbouring Turkey has recently stepped up its arms supplies to terrorists in Syria. The army has said in a statement that Ankara is providing the terrorists with arms and ammunition in exchange for oil and antiquities stolen from Syria and Iraq.
From a former Lebanese president, he says the Turkish leader has been supporting extremist groups in the region for years.
It is a well-known fact in the world that President Erdogan, since 5 years, he's been backing up the extremist fundamentalists. What happened between 18 seconds, it was premeditated because the Russian bombers were shelling all this traffic that was going on in the Turkmen mountains. At the same time, they were upsetting the plans of President Erdogan, so he thought he could do something, and he did that crazy act.
Iraq's former national security advisor says Turkey is supporting illegal oil trade by the Daesh terrorist group. In a statement posted on his Facebook page, Muaffaq al-Rabai said Ankara helps Daesh sell stolen Iraqi and Syrian oil for just $20 a barrel, which is half the market price.
Saudi Arabia's invasion of Yemen enters its 9th month. Angry protesters from all walks of life have gathered outside the Russian embassy to call on Moscow, which holds the current rotating presidency of the UN Security Council, to put an end to Riyadh's brutal war on Yemeni civilians.
We have gathered here to say to Saudi Arabia, why are you attacking our country, and call on Russia to stand beside the unfairly treated people.
Protesters have also set up a gallery outside the Russian embassy that displayed Saudi Arabia's brutal killings of Yemenis and its destruction of the impoverished nation's infrastructure. Demonstrators chanted slogans hailing Russia's serious war on terror and describing Moscow and Sana'a as real fighters of terrorism. Protesters condemned Turkey's move in downing Russian airplane near the Syrian border, accusing Ankara of supporting extremist groups. They have also rallied in support of Moscow's recent military intervention in Syria and its airstrikes against positions of ISIL, the Takfiri terrorists.
Downing the Russian airplane by Turkey is an evidence of Turkish involvement in supporting terrorism.
Biz haber alma hakkının engellenmesini protesto etmek için buraya geldik. Değerli gazetecilerin özgür haber yapma haklarını savunmak için buraya geldik.
tutuklandılar. Yani artık ülkemizde
The editor-in-chief of that opposition newspaper, Cumhuriyet in Istanbul, and the head of its bureau in the capital Ankara, just to remind you if you're catching up with this, were arrested on Thursday on terrorism charges. That's after they published an article accompanied by a video claiming that Turkish intelligence was helping to smuggle weapons to ISIL in Syria.
During the whole afternoon, supporters of the jailed Cumhuriyet journalists were rallying outside the newspaper's office in Istanbul. But when things calmed down, we were finally let into the office and allowed to talk to the journalists of one of the few remaining independent newspapers in Turkey.
For obvious reasons, the mood was tense, and many refused to talk to us on camera.
We know that they're smuggling, ISIS is smuggling oil to Turkey and through Turkey.
You know that?
Well, it's kind of common knowledge by now, but the big question is it possible that they're doing it without the government's knowledge or some authorities' knowledge?
A phone call, a few steps up the stairs, and I was sitting down with one of the bosses and another English-speaking journalist. They said watching Cumhuriyet's notorious video, which appears to show Turkish intelligence services trucks packed with shells, is enough to draw plenty of suspicion.
And what is the ISIS situation?
That things were going to ISIS.
Where does the information that they were heading to ISIS come from?
There was that flag that belongs to ISIS.
You can see the flag very clearly.
Yeah.
So where?
In the
border.
In Turkish borderline.
World's greatest journalists who knows better than most about the impact of imperial wars, from Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos to the British Labour Party's catastrophic wars on Afghanistan and Iraq, and to David Cameron's destruction of the richest country in Africa, Libya. His new film, American Power in the Asia Pacific, and its new challenge from China is out next year. John Pilger, thanks for coming back on Going Underground. So how are ISIS the progeny of Washington, London and Paris?
Oh, they are not only the progeny, they are the fully grown-up, manic, adolescent creature belonging to Paris, London, Obama, and the United States. Without the support of these three countries, without the arms that have been given to ISIS, either they've been given directly to Jabhat al-Nusra and have gone to ISIS, or they've gone the other way, or they've gone to the Wahhabists in Saudi Arabia or in Qatar. But the French, the British, the Americans and the Turks have all supplied those who have kept ISIS going.
Помогал вооружать людей, которые в Сирии боролись с Асадом-то? Кто создавал благоприятный политический информационный климат? Кто подталкивал к поставкам оружия? А вы чего, разве вы не понимаете, кто там воюет? Там воюют наемники. В основном. Вы знаете, что там платят деньги? И они воюют там, где платят больше. Вот они вооружились, им платят определенную сумму. Мне даже называли эти суммы, которые им платят. Они там воюют уже с оружием, все, у них уже не отнимешь. Потом выяснилось, что в другом месте чуть-чуть начали побольше платить. Они там туда перетекут. Вот они захватили месторождения нефтяные, там, скажем, где-то в Ираке или в Сирии. Нефть начали добывать. У них эту нефть покупают, транспортируют, продают. Почему санкции не накладывают на всех, кто это делает? А что, разве Соединенные Штаты не знают, кто это делает? Это разве не их союзники этим занимаются? У них что, нет силы, возможности повлиять на своих союзников? Или они не хотят влиять? Зачем они бомбят ИГИЛ? Вот там начали нефть добывать и больше платить. И там часть сразу этих боевиков перетекла из так называемой цивилизованной оппозиции. Сразу же перетекла в ИГИЛ, потому что там больше платят. Я считаю, что это абсолютно невыверенная, непрофессиональная политика, без опоры на реалии.
Well, Russia is pressing ahead with punitive measures against Turkey over its downing of a Russian military plane over Syria on Tuesday. President Vladimir Putin has signed a decree imposing economic sanctions against Turkey. The sanctions affect the imports of certain products, limit the operations of Turkish companies in Russia, and forbid Russian firms from employing Turkish staff. The Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, has said that it's difficult to undo the damage to relations with Ankara.
Russia is suspending visa-free travel with Turkey, days after Ankara shot down a Russian warplane at the Syrian border.
The Russian authorities have decided to suspend the visa-free regime, which is currently functioning between Russia and Turkey. This decision will come into force from January the 1st, 2016.
Many Russian tourist agencies have stopped booking trips to Turkey following the government's suggestions.
Turkish beaches are a popular destination for Russians. 4.5 million Russians visited Turkey last year alone, adding around $4 billion to Turkey's economy. Turkish data shows Russians account for around 12% of all visitors. But now, these visitors will need a visa. Some of Russia's top travel agencies have already stopped selling packages to Turkey, following warnings from their government against traveling here.
It's hard to even imagine now what we can suggest to those tourists, because prices used to be the key factor for choosing Egypt all the time. Turkey was also not the most expensive destination. I think most of those tourists will either stay at home, and some of them will choose our resorts.
Meanwhile, Turkish food exports are facing tighter controls at Russian customs, placing pressure on the $6 billion trade. But the real stakes are in the energy sector. Turkey imports roughly 65% of its natural gas from Russia. It has also awarded Russian state-owned Rosatom a $20 billion contract to build its first nuclear power plant. And both countries are involved in the Turk Stream pipeline, a proposed natural gas pipeline from Russia to Turkey across the Black Sea. Moscow has already announced that it may impose measures to restrict the $13 billion project.
Yet with slumping economies in both countries, can Turkey and Russia really afford to put the brakes on any economic cooperation?
Economists forecast Turkey's economy is estimated to grow less than 3% this year, while Russia is still bracing itself for its longest recession in decades after the collapse in oil prices.
But I do not expect Russia to impose any sanctions on the energy front. After repeated crises with Ukraine, Russia has been repeatedly blamed for using energy, especially natural gas resources, as a diplomatic leverage or as a weapon against its customers. And Russia tried very hard to prove otherwise.
Falling gas prices, increased competition, and a transformation in the way gas is sold internationally would also make it difficult for Russia to find new customers.
Well, the United States has deployed dozens of ground troops in Syria, claiming they will assist Kurdish forces in their battle against Daesh terrorists. The so-called Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said 30 US soldiers arrived in the northern city of Kobani over the past 2 days. The troops will allegedly help plan offensives against the Takfiris in the 2 Syrian cities of Jarablus and Raqqa. Kurdish sources also announced that some 20 US soldiers arrived in Hasakah province in eastern Syria. Back in October, the White House said several dozen special operations troops would be dispatched to Syria for the first open-ended mission by US ground forces there. The presence of US troops on the ground in Syria lacks any mandate from the Syrian government. Damascus says it's a violation of its sovereignty.
Explosions across Syria's Hama province. Amateur video, which cannot be independently verified by Reuters, appears to show Russia on the offensive in Syria. More footage shows panic in the streets near the Turkish border, in a country where the war has already claimed the lives of some 250,000 people. Jets believed to be Russian target a depot for trucks waiting to go through a major rebel-controlled border crossing. Syrian jets have struck the area before, but if confirmed to have been carried out by Russia, It would be one of Moscow's closest airstrikes to Turkish territory, targeting a humanitarian corridor into rebel-held Syria and an important transit point for Syrian civilians crossing to Turkey. Earlier in the week, Turkey shot down a Russian jet, which it said entered its airspace. Russia said the plane never left Syrian airspace.
Well, meanwhile, ISIL keeps growing with up to 30,000 foreign fighters recruited from around the world in its ranks, according to the latest figures. RT's Maria van Osten reports now on how recruiters are reaching potential converts in the US.
We've covered Islamic State's rise in Syria and met ISIL recruiters in Lebanon. In America, we've talked to those who go to fight the jihadists overseas, as well as to the families of US citizens who have joined their ranks in the Middle East. But now, we're tracking Islamic State members on American soil.
Behind me is one of the campuses of Florida Technical College, a large school here in the south of the state. And this is exactly here, not so long ago, that people appeared calling themselves ISIS recruiters.
Students say they were first contacted through social networks, the most common and most effective channel used by Islamic State to connect with would-be jihadists. Then the college's director says 3 men came to the campus, handing out Islamic State literature.
Looking for people that were essentially either dissatisfied with the way things are going on in the world today, or just looking for some sort of idealistic idea about what they might want to do.
Following the deadly terror attack in Paris, which ISIL claimed responsibility for, the group threatened attacks on the US capital as well. And the theory is that's why the Islamists have been recruiting on the ground in America.
The United Nations says 3 people are dead and 20 wounded after unknown attackers fired rockets at a UN peacekeeping base in northern Mali on Saturday. The attack comes only 8 days after Islamist militants attacked a hotel in the capital, killing 19 people and taking scores hostage. French troops and a 10,000-strong UN force have been struggling to stabilize the former French colony. Desert-based jihadists regularly launch rockets and missiles at northern UN bases, but it's rare for the missiles to land inside the camp.
Unknown militants shot 4 policemen dead on the road to the pyramids in Egypt's Giza province. Masked militants on a motorbike opened fire at the security forces in a checkpoint. Egypt has witnessed a growing wave of anti-security attacks following the downfall of the Islamist President Mohamed Morsi in 2013. The attacks were mainly centered in Sinai Peninsula, but expanded lately into the capital and some other cities. The Islamic State branch in Egypt has claimed responsibility for most of the attacks.
That security at airports and other vital infrastructure has also been boosted following the threat. Meanwhile, the country's national police chief says more than 80 jihadists have returned from Syria and that one of the Paris attackers had visited a school in West Java. Indonesia has experienced dozens of attacks in recent years and more than 200 terrorists have been arrested or killed. The country's counter-terrorism chief has called for greater intelligence sharing efforts within Southeast Asia as the fight against ISIL intensifies. Andy Saputra talked to the country's security chief.
The Islamic State group has claimed responsibility for a deadly attack on worshippers at a Shia mosque in northern Bangladesh. 3 gunmen burst into the mosque in Shabanj during the Thursday evening prayers and opened fire on the worshippers before fleeing. Police said the muezzin was killed and 3 others were wounded. Detectives are questioning 2 people, although they have not been formally arrested. Such attacks until recently were virtually unheard of in Bangladesh, which has a large population of 160 million people, mainly moderate Muslims.
The crowd erupts as Pope Francis enters the UN meeting hall in Nairobi, where talk turns to the environment. And the pontiff issues a warning.
In a few days, an important meeting on climate change will be held in Paris, where the international community will once again confront these issues. It would be sad, and I dare say even catastrophic, were particular interests to prevail over the common good and lead to manipulating information in order to protect their own plans and projects.
On Monday, Paris, still reeling from attacks that killed 130 people, will host a 2-week climate summit.
In this international environment, we are confronted with a choice which cannot be ignored, either to improve or to destroy the environment. Every step we take, whether large or small, individual or collective, in caring for creation opens a sure path for that generous and worthy creativity which brings out the best in human beings.
Governments will soon meet in Paris to finalize an agreement to limit climate change and strengthen resilience to its consequences. The decisions taken in Paris will shape the future of our planet and human society for generations to come. That is why we need an ambitious global agreement. It must show solidarity for the poor and vulnerable, and it must meet the climate challenge. Governments are responsible for delivering a deal, but I appeal to you, the citizens of the world, to remind them what is at stake. Let your leaders know that the time has come for a strong agreement, an agreement backed by action. Raise your voices. Challenge your leaders to be bold and to do more. We need a prosperous, clean energy future. We must protect our common home. Everyone has a role to play. I'm inspired by your commitment to make this a safer and a better world for all. I count on you to push your governments to deliver what we need in Paris. Together, we can build a healthier future for people and the planet. Thank you.
Hopes for the Paris talks are high, but on the streets of the French capital, demonstrators are angry that not enough is being done over climate change. Riot police fired tear gas at some 200 protesters at Place de la République, the city's main gathering place ever since the Paris attacks. French authorities have banned demonstrations in Paris over security concerns, so a giant climate march along the city's streets couldn't go on. Instead, some 10,000 people formed a human chain along the march route in protest.
The idea is to show that all citizens of the world are aware, and the common environmental and ecological objective is not individualistic. It's about solidarity, that we are all in the same boat that is planet Earth.
Many tens of thousands of people otherwise took part in peaceful marches in major cities, 45,000 in Sydney alone, still others in London, Athens and Madrid, New York and Sao Paulo, among others. Their message to 150 leaders gathering in Paris: there is no planet B in the fight against global warming.
We are here to defend our planet, to fight for a better place for our children to live in the future. We have caused too much damage to our planet in the last 30 years, and I really don't know if we are going to be able to recover it.
In all, over 2,000 events were held in cities across the globe, making this the biggest day of climate action in history. Still, all sides say pledges made in Paris won't be enough to limit a rise in global temperatures by just 2 degrees above pre-industrial days. That's the level widely seen as the threshold for dangerous changes in the planet's climate system.
Top story this morning, an investigation is underway in Colorado following a deadly attack on a Planned Parenthood facility. A gunman shot and killed 3 people, including a police officer. That officer, Garrett Swayze, was a member of the University of Colorado Police Department in Colorado Springs. 5 other officers and 4 civilians were wounded in the attack.
It happened in Colorado Springs, about 70 miles south of Denver. A dramatic standoff with police ended after 5 hours. The suspected gunman, Robert Louis Deere of North Carolina, is in custody this morning.
The frightening moments were captured on police scanners after authorities say the man opened fire on officers who were responding to reports of an active shooter.
I've been shot! Come back to my car!
With the gunman still on the loose inside the Colorado Springs Planned Parenthood, police were able to rescue people hiding inside the building, including Katanya Crown.
I heard everyone in the lobby screaming, "Get down, get down," and then I saw a gunman walking with a shotgun just shooting randomly.
He was aiming for my head. It's just weird to stare into the face of somebody like that. And he didn't win.
Well, this was a terrible, terrible tragedy. It could have been much worse but for the actions of the first responders, particularly the police officers involved.
The situation was further complicated because law enforcement was concerned the gunman brought explosives.
We have eyes on him. He is coming towards the front of the business.
We did get officers inside of the building at the Planned Parenthood, and the officers were able to shout to the suspect and make communication with him. And at that point, they were able to get him to surrender, and he was taken into custody.
We have our suspect right now. He's saying that he is alone and he's by himself. Okay, good job.
We saw a lot of individual acts of bravery today, and actually a lot of bravery as a team.
3 people were shot dead and 9 others were injured in a shooting in the western U.S. state of Colorado. After the 2012 school shootings in Newton, Connecticut, which claimed 28 lives, Obama initiated but failed to push stronger gun control laws. And in his 15th televised speech on mass shooting in the U.S. since taking office, Obama said, quote, "We have a Congress that explicitly blocks us from even collecting data on how we could potentially reduce gun deaths."
Start snitching on the bad guy. Okay? Hands up! Don't shoot! 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 Back up! We want freedom! Freedom! All these racist kids! Freedom! Freedom!
Tensions on the border in Macedonia. Hundreds of Moroccans, Algerians, and Pakistanis try to storm the border between Greece and Macedonia. They are among about 1,500 migrants who have been stranded after Europe deciding to filter migrants, allowing only those fleeing conflict in Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq to cross into the Balkans. More than 800,000 refugees and migrants have arrived in Europe by sea so far this year. But for many, hope for a better life is fading, leaving them stranded on Europe's borders.
Refugees into Europe continues unabated. Scandinavian countries are giving them the cold shoulder, it seems. Norway's posted this advert in a newspaper, the Afghanistan Times Daily, announcing tougher regulations for asylum seekers. Among other things, it's warning that those denied asylum will be returned home by force. The idea is nothing new. In September, Denmark did the very same thing in a Lebanese paper. It highlighted how migrants will have problems getting permanent residency and welfare in the country. Sweden, too, is now also toughening up its stance on refugees, introducing a U-turn in its open-door policy this week. The reversal appeared too much to handle, in fact, for the country's deputy PM, as you'll see, who broke down in tears when announcing the new measures.
Bästa sättet att hjälpa mina miljöpartistiska kommunalråd är att ändå göra någonting.
Well, emotions clearly running high in Sweden. In recent years, tens of thousands of refugees have arrived in the country, of course. In 2012, Sweden ranked third behind only Germany and France in the number of people trying to seek asylum there. Last year, it registered the highest per capita number of refugees among all developed nations. That's provoked some strong reaction from the public. The anti-immigration Sweden Democrats Party, then, is now the third largest force in Parliament. They sent out their own warning to refugees recently, highlighting some problems they may face if they go there.
The Dutch Prime Minister has warned that Europe risks collapsing over the refugee crisis. Mark Rutte said protecting borders should be the first priority to prevent the fall of the 28-member bloc. He added that their next steps should be to stem the asylum seeker influx into Europe. Rutte also stressed the need to keep the Schengen functioning in order to avoid a collapse. The Dutch Prime Minister's comments come as the Netherlands prepares to take over the 6-month rotating presidency of the European Union on the 1st of January. Europe is currently facing its worst refugee crisis since World War II. Over 850,000 asylum seekers fleeing war and poverty in the Middle East and North Africa have found their way onto the continent so far this year.
Hi, everybody. In 1620, a small band of pilgrims came to this continent. Refugees who had fled persecution and violence in their native land. Nearly 400 years later, we remember their part in the American story, and we honor the men and women who helped them in their time of need. Thanksgiving is a day for food and football, and for hoping the turkey didn't turn out too dry. But it's also a day to count our blessings and to give back to others. A reminder that no matter our circumstances, all of us have something to be grateful for. And I've been touched by the generosity of the Americans who've written me letters and emails in recent weeks, offering to open their homes to refugees fleeing the brutality of ISIL. Now, people should remember that no refugee can enter our borders until they undergo the highest security checks of anyone traveling to the United States. That was the case before Paris, and it's the case now. Nearly 4 centuries after the Mayflower set sail, the world is still full of pilgrims. Men and women who want nothing more than the chance for a safer, better future for themselves and their families. What makes America America is that we offer that chance. We turn Lady Liberty's light to the world and widen our circle of concern to say that all God's children are worthy of our compassion and care. That's part of what makes this the greatest country on earth.